Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.
Hello and welcome to the Outer Hour. Thanks for joining us. When I say us, me, Tom London, I'm with you for the next 60 minutes as we discuss energy in this country. Tonight, the show is about energy. It's Energy Month. I don't know if there's one South African left who isn't frustrated with load shedding and the energy supply problems we've got in this country, and we'll be talking about that tonight. We'll also be shining the light and putting Koeberg under the microscope, because Eskom released a statement today talking about half of Koeberg being offline. In fact, I think they used the word they pinning their hopes on Koeberg coming back online. When a power utility like Eskom uses the words "we're pinning our hopes" in a press statement, it makes me a little nervous. Should make you nervous too. We've got a panel of experts on tonight, and we will be discussing these energy problems that we have in South Africa. Let me take you behind the scenes quickly, and we'll get to you in just a moment as you say hello to us. And do say hello in the comment section, either on the YouTube channel or on the Facebook channel. We're live across both platforms, and what we love is to see your comments. We love to see you asking the pertinent questions. We like to see you making the comments. We like to see you engaging with the outer team in the comment section. We like to see you engaging with each other, forming a community underneath this video. So if you're a regular viewer, welcome to the show. If you're a first-time viewer, pop first-time viewer in the comment section. We'll welcome you warmly into the Outer Hour fold. Right, the producer of the show is Devaney David. She's standing by in her office at home. Hello, Devaney.
Hi everyone. Hi Tom. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Are we looking forward to a good show tonight? Who have we got on this evening? Who is our panel of experts?
Most definitely. We have Stefanie Fick, we have Peter Becker, and then we have Chris Yelland, and the head of marketing, Samantha van Nispen.
Well, speaking about Samantha van Nispen, thanks, Devaney. She's also standing by. Samantha will be moderating your comments in the YouTube feed tonight. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everybody. Looking forward to seeing who joins us in the YouTube channel tonight. It's getting busier and busier every week, so it's very exciting.
Well, that's the face behind the comments in the YouTube section. If you see Outer, you'll know that it is Sam you are chatting to. Masego Motswaneng is not feeling too good tonight, so we're not going to put her on camera feeling a bit poorly, but she is in your Facebook page and will be moderating the comments. You can say hello to Masego right now. Now, what should we do? Should we say hello to you as you join us from around South Africa and around the world? Let's see who's on first. And I think it was Claire Feldman who got onto the channel first and made a comment. I'm just waiting for the comments to load, and it was. So we say, hello, Claire. Thank you for joining us. We'll put a few comments on screen now, and we'll keep rolling them as you join us. So do say hello. We'll put your name up on screen and your comment. Claire says she's currently sitting in the dark. Roland Krabanoff says, good evening all. Hello, Roland, regular viewer to the show. Good to see you on board. It looks like a lot of people are in the dark tonight. Brendan Slade is also in the dark in Pretoria. Hello, Brendan. Member of the outer team. You can chat to Brendan in the comment section down below. Stefanie Fick is on your screen and in the comment section. Engage with Stefanie in the comment section. We'll be saying more hellos as we go through the show. It does seem as if load shedding is affecting everybody tonight, and that includes us, which makes it more important for you to like and share the show. So I've just done that. You can do that too. Just hit the like button and hit the share button on your device like I've done there. And you can get this out to more and more people. Michael John Billsbury says, hello, Outer, and more of our regular viewers and new viewers will join us as we go along. So keep the comments rolling, keep the questions coming, and let's get into the heart of this discussion. Tonight, we are talking about energy. We are going to focus on Koeberg. We are going to talk about load shedding. We're going to talk about solutions to these energy problems we've got. And I couldn't help as I was having a cup of coffee before the show, thinking about these problems we've got in this country, in our SOEs, in our government departments. Very often in the comment section, we hear about cadre deployment, and I look at that and I go, yeah, I agree. However, political parties deploying their own members into strategic positions is nothing new. It's probably never going to end in any political system around the world. And although it should be something we take notice of, I've got another question. And here's my question that I'd like to keep running through the show tonight. My question is, who's not doing their job? I went and bought and I'm going to mention the brand Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I'm not a regular KFC guy, but on the odd occasion on a Wednesday before the show, I'm feeling a bit peckish. I'll go down and I'll get myself a bucket for one. And today I walked into the KFC branch here in Broskrane, and as I was waiting for my order, a member of staff came up and said, would you mind taking part in an online customer service survey? And I said no, and he showed me how to log on. I answered a couple of questions, what was the food like, what were the staff like, etc., etc. And obviously this kind of intelligence will be fed back to the head office, where you'll have managers and executives sitting doing SWOT analysis and looking for weaknesses and weak branches, and then making it their business, their job, to improve the efficiency of their food stores. And that's what we come to expect from the private sector. It seems it all falls apart when we touch government or we touch SOEs. I wonder whether customer service satisfactions even see a patient in a clinic around South Africa, or whether a satisfaction survey is ever taken in the queues outside licensing departments, whether our government officials and executives and directors and superintendents actually know what the general public think and feel about them doing their jobs properly or not. So the question I'm going to ask tonight, I'm going to keep asking it. Who's not doing their job properly? Who's going to work and clocking in and clocking out or signing the register and not actually spending time there? Who are the managers? Who are the executives? Who are the directors? Who are the ministers that have portfolios, that have departments to run, to manage, that are not managing their departments properly? It gets more and more interesting as we get into the energy debate and the energy sector, because we got a lot of responsible people in responsible positions. Are they doing their jobs? That's my question. I'm going to ask everyone that question tonight. So I have to ask the panel to prepare yourself, please, because the questions are going to come thick and fast. So let's say hello to our guests this evening, and ladies first. Advocate Stefanie Fick will be on screen in a second. She's the head of accountability for Outer. And let's just put everyone on screen there. Stefanie in the bottom left corner of your screen, standing by to take part in this discussion. We've got energy expert Chris Yelland, Managing Director of EE Business Intelligence. You'll know Chris if you're a regular viewer to the show, but a first-time contributor and expert to the hour tonight is Peter Becker, spokesperson for the Koeberg Alert Alliance. If you live in Cape Town with this massive nuclear power station on your doorstep, you should be asking questions. You should be asking questions about the safety, the efficiency. You should be asking questions about the long-term future. You should be asking questions about the repairs. You should be asking questions about half of this power station not being functional. You should be asking questions about the mistakes and the slip-ups we've seen in the past. And these are the kind of questions and answers we need to get into when we get into energy debates. And Peter Becker joins us this evening. He's an expert when it comes to the Koeberg power station and nuclear energy. He's also visited, I think, the Fukushima just after the fallout in Fukushima. Let me give you a quick bio on Peter. Peter is a resident Cape Townian who's been involved in the debate around nuclear power since about 2010. He's the spokesperson for the Koeberg Alert Alliance, which is an alliance of organizations and individuals concerned about safety at the Koeberg nuclear site. He also contributes to the blog KoebergAlert.org and frequently makes submissions to the government on regulations, policy issues, and environmental assessments. Now, Peter was invited to present at a post-Fukushima conference in Japan in 2012. He toured the area. He saw the consequences of the 2011 nuclear disaster firsthand. He attended a conference on nuclear waste handling in Sweden. He met with civil society organizations as well as the Swedish nuclear regulator. He also visited the Forsmark nuclear plant and the Swedish final repository for nuclear waste. He has a BSc degree from UCT and a BSc Honours from UNISA. He's well placed to comment on the issues tonight. So let's say good evening to Peter Becker. And Peter, thank you for joining us out of Cape Town, I assume.
Yes, good evening. Good to be with you all.
Thank you, Peter. And let me start by asking you let me ask you a very general question, I suppose, and that is, if I was living in Cape Town, if I was staying somewhere in the suburbs of Cape Town, aware that there's this place called Koeberg down the road, should I be worried? Should I be nervous? Should I be thinking about the future of Koeberg and whether it's going to affect me in whatever way it can? Or is this something that is best left to the regulators and we trust people in positions to keep us safe and productive?
Well, anything comes with risk, right? And when it comes to a nuclear power plant, unfortunately, the risk or the consequences of something going wrong are very extreme. And I think we've all known that from various things around the world. So what we do rely on is a strong regulator. The NNR is our national nuclear regulator, and they have the mandate to protect the public and the environment from any harmful effects of radiation. So it is very much their responsibility to be monitoring Koeberg and to ensure that it's as safe as the regulations require it to be. Of course, there's another whole discussion around that, is that whatever or however safe it is, there's always a residual risk. So there's always a risk of something going wrong, which is why we have an evacuation plan to get people out of the area if the worst were to happen. So it's a question beyond, is it safe? The question is, do we need it? Does South Africa need it? What would be the consequences of not having Koeberg? It would obviously reduce the risk, but what other consequences would that have? And I'm sure we can get into that as the evening goes on.
Well, you've said something very interesting. You've spoken about an evacuation plan, and I'm not sure how many residents of Cape Town are aware of evacuation plans. What is an evacuation plan and what does it entail?
So there are regulations that are fairly arbitrary, and there's a circle around nuclear plants which is 10 miles, and that's really a number that's just picked because it was a round number, and that turns into 16 kilometers. So there's a circle around Koeberg, and it has to be possible to evacuate that circle within a set time frame. And so there is a plan in place to somehow get, I think it's around 250,000 people potentially out of that area within that time frame, which is less than a day. So that is what the evacuation plan is intended to do. Of course, there's some devil in the detail, because it's one thing to get people out of the area, but what next? Where do they go the next day, you know? And a lot of our thinking around emergency planning is for floods and for fires. And the pattern there is you put the fire out, you dig the mud away from the flood, and you let people go back. And we start to rebuild and so on and so on. Unfortunately, with a major nuclear accident such as Fukushima, it's about 300 years before it's safe to go back. So what is a little bit lacking from that plan is where to relocate those people, where their children will go to school, where they will have jobs, and where they will get housing.
We'll be posting your questions to Peter, Chris and Stefanie as we go through the show. So put the questions in the comments section down below, and I'll be sure to put as many of them across to our contributors this evening. The Koeberg Alert Alliance, which you are the spokesperson for, Peter, are you anti-nuclear? Do you want to see no nuclear energy in South Africa? What's your position on nuclear energy?
So I'm a spokesperson, not necessarily the spokesperson.
Sure.
Spokesperson, there are a few. So we believe if you look at it carefully, that you'll find that there's no need for new nuclear power in this country, number one. And that is a conclusion that's supported by the CSIR, by the IRP 2019, the government's own planning document. It says if you're looking at the least cost mechanism of delivering electricity and staying within our emissions targets, then nuclear has no place in that. The only consequence of adding nuclear will be to increase the end price of electricity. So from that point of view, we do not support new nuclear power, no.
And would you agree with that, Chris? I mean, you're our energy expert that we have on the show frequently. Do you think that there's a place for nuclear energy in the future? If so, why or why not?
Well, if we're talking about new nuclear power, I certainly think that it is not the solution to South Africa's power needs. A new nuclear power plant will take at least 5 years to go through the procurement process, and another 10 to 12 years for construction. So we're talking about, about 15 years away at least. And our problems are right now. And so it's not a solution to the current problems. But further than that, the whole business case, the economics of it, don't make sense. It's extremely expensive upfront costs, and it takes 15 years before the first kilowatt hour gets delivered into the grid. And this makes the finance costs very high. It also makes the risks very high because it kind of locks you into a very long-term commitment. Just 15 years just for the procurement and construction phase, another 60 years or so, sometimes people say 80 years for operation phase, and another 10 to 15 years for decommissioning. You're locked in to a decision for the next 100 years. Now, can you imagine, had we locked ourselves in to a nuclear fleet from Rosatom in Russia, at a time when Russia is now become isolated in the world and has no access to technology. And believe me, in a nuclear power plant, a lot of Western technology is used in the construction, even in a Russian nuclear power plant. I don't know if you've read recently that in Finland, where they've been building a Rosatom Russian power plant for the last 15 years, they finally abandoned this entire project as a result of the fact that Rosatom cannot complete the project because of its isolated status, and they don't have access to the technology. So Finland have actually cancelled a plant after 15 years of construction. Can you imagine, had South Africa been locked in for the next 100 years to a 9,600 megawatt fleet of nuclear power plants from Russia? The point is, you have to commit to one vendor country, to one vendor company, to one nuclear technology for the next 100 years at a time when there is great uncertainty and turmoil in the energy sector globally. I mean, would you like to buy a Nokia brick cell phone and be locked into that cell phone for the next 100 years when smartphones are just round the corner? The same thing applies in the energy sector. So for a number of reasons, and it's not because I'm against nuclear as a technology. I'm not, I don't have an ideological position against nuclear, but it's just the wrong solution for South Africa and for many other countries in the world.
Well, here's a comment that I picked up on Twitter today, and it came from Gesant Abado. This is directly from Twitter. Can I ask a stupid question? What is stopping South Africa from investing in solar and wind energy for the long haul? Surely it can't just be political reasons, he asks. But what is stopping us? I mean, why is it that it seems to me that we haven't done enough in the renewable energy space? Let me put that question to Peter first. What is stopping us, Peter?
I can just add something to what Chris was saying.
Sure.
I think it was everything's uncertain. And I know where Chris is going to with that, but there's one thing that is certain, and that's the trend of the cost of renewable energy. That has been a very, very clear trend line for years, if not a decade or more. And we know that in the future, renewable energy will be cheaper than it is now. So that is one thing we can be certain about. And I think that feeds into what Chris was saying. Do we want to lock ourselves into a technology that is expensive compared to what the options are going to be in 5 years, which won't matter if we've committed to a 100-year project? So I just wanted to add that.
Sure.
So why aren't we building renewables? Yeah, let's go there. And I find this a very interesting subject. And Chris, you and I were on a panel a while back, and I think I asked this question of the panel, and I think there was a feeling that the capacity of Eskom is missing in order to build new plants. But I think it's important to look at the Electricity Regulation Act and also the powers that rest in the Minister for Energy. And no power plant can be built, well, large-scale power plant can be built without a Section 34 determination from the Minister. So that means Eskom's hands are completely tied. They would maybe love to do renewable energy. I heard the CEO, Andre de Ruyter, talking about areas of land they've put aside up north for renewable projects, but they cannot move on that without the energy minister issuing a determination. And I think we can quite clearly answer your question, well, who needs to do what? That is what we need to do. We need large-scale, grid-scale, utility connected renewable energy, and the first step to that is a Section 34 determination by the Minister.
Let me ask the advocate to step in here and ask Advocate Stefanie Fick for her opinion. Stefanie, what do you think is holding up the march towards renewable energy?
Well, I can only speculate, but I think the feeling is mutual. That I think yet again it's about political interference. It's about, where can we score with what tender? And then there's also, maybe I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but and we were discussing it today in our energy meeting, is that, isn't what is currently happening with load shedding? Yes, Eskom has got a problem, but the absolute, I think, our infrastructure is being attacked, and it's as if there's a calculated attack to make sure that Eskom does not provide what it's supposed to provide, and that maybe there's someone benefiting. And what is tragic about it, whether that's true or not, whether that is my conspiracy theory or not, is that is the way we think, is that, tenders aren't concluded or contracts aren't concluded in the best interest of South Africa. It's always about who's going to benefit. So I think that's the same question, is why aren't we expanding? Yes, it might be expensive. It's less expensive now, but we need to move forward. And why aren't we just considering other energy sources? Now, I'm not an expert. I mean, you have, I think, the best experts you can get on this panel tonight. So, if there's a question, they don't have the answers. I believe that there aren't any answers. But I just think that, we were forced, or at least I think that sometimes one is forced to think about all the conspiracy theories purely because of the history of government. That, if you just look at state capture, how many contracts were concluded, even with Eskom. I think the main reason, or one of the main reasons Eskom is struggling so much is because of state capture, that there were so many contracts that were concluded that there was just no value for money. And unfortunately, we need to turn that ship around, because it doesn't matter whether it's nuclear, new energy or whatever, if we sort of can't fix the fact that contracts should be concluded in the best interest of South Africa and not someone else's pocket, we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, conspiracy theories or not, we never know where the truth lies sometimes when it comes to these stories in South Africa. But I'm sure we agree on one thing, that we wouldn't want to see Eskom being privatized and sold off for 51 Rand and the government holding on to all the debt. In other words, the taxpayer, like we're watching with SAA at the moment. That would be a tragedy to watch a once great institution being flogged for $50. I just want to put Eskom's media statements up. It came in a couple of hours ago, and I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll read you a couple of sections. Eskom pins hopes on returning Koeberg and Kusile power station used to reduce pressure on the constrained power system. Eskom pins hopes. This came from Eskom themselves. We are pinning our hopes. Unit 2 of Koeberg nuclear power station, together with the 2 generation units, expected to return to service following the modification and correction of the design defects. So we got Unit 2 off. And during the next few weeks, Eskom will return to service, they say. 2 units at Kusile power station and Koeberg Unit 2 is expected to return by the end of June 2022. How important is Koeberg when it comes to the national grid and the energy supply, Chris?
Well, Koeberg supplies about, you can say in round figures, 5% of South Africa's electricity. So it's not insignificant. And certainly by not having one unit online right now, because it's undergoing a life extension, it is contributing at least one stage of load shedding. So whenever we have stage 2 load shedding, if that unit was not off as it is at the moment, we would probably have about stage 1 load shedding.
Okay.
And instead of stage 4, we would have stage 3. And the thing is that this unit has been off since the beginning of this year, and it hasn't even it's gone off for this period, but they're not actually doing the job that it was going off for. In other words, they found halfway through the project that they should never have switched off in the first place because they were not ready to switch off.
All right, so who's not?
And sorry?
Who's not doing their job then? I mean, when I listen to something like that, it sounds like someone hasn't done their job properly. Someone hasn't planned properly.
Sure.
Someone's slipping up. So who's slipping up?
Yeah, in this particular case, one of the reasons why they can't continue with the life extension is because they hadn't completed the building, which is going to house the steam generators that were removed. Remember, these are radioactive steam generators, and they have to be housed in a containment building to contain that radioactivity. And they shut down without having this building ready in time. Now, that is it's an Eskom problem for sure. I mean, they are responsible, for the shutdown and all the work that's being done. But going further than that, I think it's a very, very poor reflection of the National Nuclear Regulator, who gave the green light to Eskom to switch off that reactor, knowing full well that that building was not ready yet. For me, I just can't understand how the National Nuclear Regulator can get itself into that kind of position, but that's what happened. So in that particular case, I see a combination between Eskom and the National Nuclear Regulator. The regulator should never have given the green light to do the shutdown, which is causing us a problem right now, with this building not ready. So that's what I think. But yeah, certainly Koeberg is important to the extent that if you switch off a reactor, you've got 900 megawatts less generation capacity, and that can contribute to one stage of load shedding.
Let's talk about the status of Koeberg and ask Peter Becker what the status of Koeberg is. When does its current license come to an end? Just fill us in on licensing, licenses, and license terms, please, Peter.
Sure. If I can just add a bit to what Chris was saying, it depends how you measure Koeberg when you say what percent of the country's energy. Because we've got so many faults at the moment, the amount of energy that Koeberg's contributing tends to go up if both reactors were running, by the way, Chris, because it's more like 2% at the moment with only one running. But if you look at nominal capacity, that means assuming all the plants were running, Koeberg represents about 3.5% of national nominal capacity. That's according to the CSIR. So is it significant? Is it not significant? The answer to that depends where you are in time. So a healthy reserve margin, which means the excess capacity that a utility has, is considered to be 10 to 15%, something like that. And that gives you some headroom, some buffer room. So if something goes wrong, you've got something kind of spare. So if we had a healthy system, then the 3.5% of Koeberg would be entirely irrelevant because it just wouldn't matter. It would be within that reserve margin. However, at the moment, we're running on empty. We're skating along the bottom of the barrel, to mix my metaphors. So Koeberg at the moment is incredibly useful because, as Chris pointed out, it represents one stage of load shedding. And that is why it is so puzzling to me that this is the time that Eskom chose to take that reactor offline, because it has directly resulted in load shedding. And if we look at the cost of load shedding, and the estimates vary, it's the cost of the economy. Is it 20 Rand a kilowatt hour? Is it 100 Rand kilowatt hour? It's affected by if it's planned or if it's unexpected. But we estimated that this 6-month outage would cost the economy of South Africa 32 billion Rand in load shedding costs. Now it's actually, from what we can see, going to be 40 billion, not 32 billion. And that was going to be for each 6-month outage. And as Chris mentioned, we now, instead of 2 6-month outages being planned, one for Unit 2 and then one for Unit 1, we're now going to have 3 outages because this one has been aborted or partially done, let's say. Then there's going to be another 6-month outage according to Eskom's plan in the end of this year, September, and then another one in September 2023 at the next fuel outage for the Unit 2. So that is the consequence of choosing to turn Koeberg off now in order to do a refurbishment for it to be available beyond 2025. Now, if we look at what you just said about Kusile and Medupi, I think those units that are currently offline are just around 2 gigawatts, which is about what Koeberg is. So if those units were working like they ought to be, then we again would have no need for Koeberg. So I think it's quite interesting to look at detail, and maybe we don't have time now or the scope. What is it actually costing to do this extension of Koeberg? And what is the cost per kilowatt hour going to be at the end of the day? And I'll give you one small example. NUM, the National Unit of Mine Workers, made a submission to Parliament recently, the Oversight Committee, and they claim that the penalty that Eskom had to pay for the French to come here, find the building wasn't ready, and to go back home, merely the penalty is 1 billion rand. That's according to NUM.
Wow.
So now, if you look at the costing of Eskom, they're not going to put that as a cost of Koeberg. That appears somewhere else in their balance sheet. Penalties paid or something. But if you take a hard look at Koeberg, I think the cost of the electricity after the refurbishment will be significantly higher than the bid cost of renewable energy after that. So sorry, I went on a long ramble and I forgot your question.
No worries.
What's the status?
Yeah,
when will the license expire?
Yeah, just fill us in on license conditions and what this license really means.
Okay. So the NNR, as I've said, has the mandate to protect the public and the environment. And the way it does that is it enforces regulations and issues operating licenses and processes application fees. And without an operating license, no nuclear installation such as Koeberg can operate. So in other words, the NNR has the power at any point to make a decision that Koeberg must shut down for safety reasons. When they issued the license initially, there was no expiry date, and that license has been varied. It's called variations, and we're currently on variation 19. And the most recent change or variation that the NNR made is they explicitly added an expiry date, because the plant was designed for 40 years. The first unit went online in 1984, so that means July 2024, it will come to the end of its 40 years. And I think that was a very good step by the NNR, taking their regulatory duty seriously. And they said, okay, this license will explicitly expire in July 2024. Beyond that, you must turn this plant off on that day unless a few things have happened. And that is where we're heading towards. The standard thing is to say that they must get permission from the NNR, a license to run for another 20 years. So that is, I think, what Eskom has the plan to do. But it's also possible for deviations to be granted by the CEO of the NNR. So it's possible within the regulations that some kind of condemnation is granted so that it can run a little bit beyond that if they're running late. Because I think we've seen quite a pattern in this refurbishment of Koeberg that it's pretty much runs late. It was essential to complete it in 2018, according to a report by Eskom. And now we had to do it in this year, and now we're going to do it next year. So I think it should have a good, long, hard look at the economics of what is going on at Eskom, and particularly because we're costing the economy, not Eskom, by having that plant offline right at the moment when we need it in 2022 and 2023.
What happens when the license expires?
Well, technically, if they haven't been given an extension, the plant must stop operating. The plant must come offline. I hear people are often concerned, like, if it goes offline, what's going to happen? Are we going to have load shedding, more load shedding, and so on? I think it's important to look at this in context. I mean, by 2030, we want to take about 11 gigawatts of coal offline, right, in terms of our emission targets. So we need to build massive new generation capacity. And I think we all agree that that should be renewable energy. So the 3.5% or the 2 gigawatts that Koeberg supplies is really going to be small fry in that picture. We need to focus on replacing large chunks of our generation capacity.
Well, here's a question that's come in from one of our YouTube viewers. Bello, there's many ways I can pronounce this. Bellerophon is what I'm going to say. Tell me if I'm right or not. What is the next best option if nuclear is not an option for energy generation? Asks our viewer. What's the next best option? And let me put
for me?
Let me put the question to. Let me put it to Chris first and come back to you, Peter. How's that, Chris?
Chris is the man.
Yeah. Look, the studies, and these are by various different parties, but certainly including the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, the CSIR, University of Cape Town, and a number of international studies that have been done, have shown absolutely conclusively that the least cost option that uses the least water, that generates the least CO2 emissions, and that creates the most jobs is a blend of wind and solar, photovoltaic, and energy storage, which comes in the form of battery energy storage. That is the least cost option that ticks all the other boxes. Any of the other options come at a greater cost and at a worse environmental impact and do not create the same amount of jobs. And that's why, if you look at the Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, that's why the new build up to the year 2030 is dominated by wind and solar PV and battery storage and gas to power, which is a flexible generation source that also backs up the intermittency or the variability of wind and solar. So it's absolutely clear. You might ask, well, why is there some new coal in the IRP and there's also some hydropower from the DRC? Those were political decisions. In other words, they are forced into the plan because of various political considerations. So, for example, the 2,500 megawatts of hydropower from the Democratic Republic of Congo is simply because South Africa and the DRC have a treaty in place. And it would be, if South Africa brought out a plan that didn't include this, the people in the DRC would say, you're on breach of your treaty. The reality, of course, is that 2,500 megawatts will never come on stream by 2030 anyway. So it's in there as a kind of a window dressing, simply because there happens to be a treaty, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to actually happen. So just separate the political forcing in of certain technologies from the IRP study. The IRP study is clear. Wind and solar PV and flexible generation are the best solutions for South Africa going forward.
Would you agree with that, Peter?
Absolutely, and Chris has quoted good sources, and that's kind of for sure. There's also another point I can amplify a little bit. Chris said a key word there, variable. What did you say? The backup power needs to be rampable up and down. So when it comes to a nuclear plant such as Koeberg, it's inherently not rampable. So it's either on or off. And it can be changed slightly within 5% or something like that, but it's incredibly slow to ramp up as well, about 2% an hour. So it's not like you can see you're short of electricity and ramp up your nuclear power and ramp it down when the wind starts to blow. It's a very slow-moving dinosaur of a beast, and it doesn't fit on a grid with renewables. It doesn't fit well. It crowds out renewables from that point of view. And also Sorry,
carry on.
Another interesting point, often we hear that renewables are variable because when the wind doesn't blow and whatever, glad they've stopped using the word unreliable. Now they call it intermittent. So that's a better word for it. But when it comes to a nuclear plant, when you have to refuel it, the output of that unit drops to zero. And that stays at zero for approximately 6 weeks. So in a way, you could say that nuclear is an incredibly variable supplier of fuel because it's got to be offline every 18 months for 6 weeks. And during those 6 weeks, you have to have a backup to that nuclear plant to fill in that gap. And the question is, if you've got a backup which can handle 6 weeks, can it perhaps not handle 7 weeks?
Yeah.
And so on. And we get to a point where maybe a nuclear plant just isn't required at all.
Chris, I know you wanted to add to that, so go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what Peter has said, this question that nuclear power is not a variable or flexible source of generation, is not flexible enough to cope with the variability of wind and solar PV. And if I want to just explain this a little bit more, you know that the minister is pushing for 2,500 megawatts of new nuclear power.
Yeah.
That's what he wants. In 15 years' time, in 2035, he wants 2,500 megawatts of new nuclear. I just want to explain clearly why this is a complete waste of time and why it's completely unnecessary. Because in his own plan, the IRP 2019 calls for about 20,000 megawatts of wind and solar PV, variable wind and solar PV. So this output of 20,000 megawatts is variable. Now, to cope with that variability, you need flexible generation to fill the gaps. And if all you're going to do is add 2,500 megawatts of steady baseload power at the bottom of this 20,000 megawatts of variable, can you see that it's not going to fill the gaps? In fact, it's actually going to do absolutely nothing. So what we do not need is baseload power of 2,500 megawatts in 2035. We need flexible generation to fill the gaps. And that's not what's going to be provided by the minister's 2,500 megawatts of steady baseload power. It serves absolutely no purpose in the power system of the future. The power system of the future looks for, needs, and will pay a premium price for flexible generation that can fill the gaps.
Well, I'm learning something tonight. Thanks to both of you. Claire Feldman has this comment or question. Surely the regulator is answerable to the public and not Eskom. We'll get to Peter in just a moment because he sat on the board of the NNR. But let's ask Stefanie this question, our legal expert. Who is the regulator, the NNR, answerable to, Stefanie?
Well, I think maybe Peter is you'll hear it from the horse's mouth. But I think as a regulator, they are supposed to be objective. They are the regulators, so they should regulate in terms of their mandate. So there shouldn't be political interference. There shouldn't be interference from Eskom, and they should actually act on behalf of, yet again, South Africa. But I think we are struggling, and we see this more and more struggling in South Africa, that, there's either political interference or there's corruption or whatever. And that regulators like NERSA, like the NNR, is not as objective as one would like it to be. And that's where I think this is where the system fails us as South Africans, because, not a lot of people, I think a lot of South Africans, whether it is nuclear and it's not, whether I agree with nuclear or not, and whether I agree with renewables or whatever the case may be, I think the majority of South Africans just wants to have electricity, just wants to have affordable electricity. So we need to, and we don't, we need to trust government, and we need to trust our regulators to look at the best option in terms of cost and in terms of safety and so forth. And I just don't think that we get that. But in the meantime, while we can't trust our regulators, we can't trust the politicians to deal with this issue in the best interest of all of us. What we need to accept is that somewhere along the line, there's going to be corruption. Somewhere along the line, there's going to be a tender. And somewhere along the line, all they do is they're going to expect the consumer to pay for whatever mistake they make. The government is also of the opinion that car powership is a good thing, and that is just going to cost us in the long run an enormous amount of money. So unfortunately, although I think the NNR, the idea behind it was good, the implementation was atrocious.
We'll get into where the NNR gets their money from in just a moment, but let me ask Peter how he got involved in the NNR and the board. Peter?
Yeah, sure. And as always, if I may, just to add something to what was said before, some people might be asking you the question in the chat, but can't they make nuclear power so it can ramp up and down? Can't we have nuclear plants that can respond, like some new technology or whatever? And there's an inherent and obvious economic problem with that. When you cost the power of a plant, you cost it assuming the plant works at full capacity. If you spend all the capital cost on a nuclear plant up front and all the financing costs and so on, and then you run it at 50% capacity, can you see it's obvious that it then costs twice as much per kilowatt hour? So this fantasy that they can somehow make nuclear power plants that will ramp down and fulfill the need, in the modern grid of being able to supply as it's needed is just economically absolute nonsense. Who is the NNR answerable to? Well, it has a clear mandate, and that mandate is to protect the public and the environment. So from that, I would say it has a responsibility and is answerable to the public. Of course, there's this interesting question with state-owned entities, and perhaps someone like Stefani can help me understand, but who's the shareholder? Who is the NNR responsible to? And is the word shareholder an appropriate concept for a regulator? A shareholder is somebody who you must add value as the company for it. But in that way, maybe the public should be the shareholder of the NNR. So I'm confused about that, and it's how it all kind of fits in. And in terms of the independence of the NNR, the International Atomic Energy Agency had some concerns about that, but I'm sure you'll get to that in other questions. So let me answer what you've actually asked me. How did I get involved in the NNR? Well, I've been following the whole issue for a long time and have worked with the NNR, or at least interacted a lot with the NNR over the years, from back in 2010 or something. And I've noticed that the NNR Act says that there must be a director on the board representing communities. And it also says there must be a labor representative and so on. But there wasn't such a person. And we noticed this in end of 2020, that there hadn't been that person appointed. Now, unfortunately, the NN Act has no sanction. In other words, there's no penalty if the minister doesn't appoint such a person. It just says that he must. And this is maybe a little bit of a problem with our law. So there was a long period where there just wasn't such a person, and that didn't stop the NNR working, because they still have a quorum. They still have enough directors present in meetings. So as a response to that, I asked around, and a lot of people in civil society felt that they should have their representative there. And so they started to nominate people. And several of those organizations nominated me. And then I got around May, I think in 2020, a request to send my CV to the NNR, which I was surprised at, and I did so. And then in around June 2021, I was appointed. Cabinet minutes reflected that I'd been appointed to the board of the NNR.
Peter, let's follow the money, shall we? We've got some financials from the NNR. I'm going to pop them up on screen now. And the first slide I'm going to put up is statements of financial performance. And there are two areas I'm going to ask you to comment on. This is revenue that we're talking about. So this is money coming into the NNR. One is revenue from exchange transactions and authorization fees. So if you could tell us what an authorization fee is, and then government grants, which seems obvious, but I see government grants of 43 million rand in 2020, and authorization fees almost 200 million rand, 196 million rand. The bulk of the money comes from authorization fees. What is an authorization fee?
Okay, so I assume you've got that statement of financial performance on the screen for the viewers. I've got that up on my screen. And if we're looking at the 2021 column, right, because that's the most recent, slightly higher figures there.
Okay, got it.
212 million from authorization fees. What an authorization fee is the fee to operate. So it's whether you're operating a nuclear plant or operating a radioactive mine tailings processing plant. In order to operate that, it's like a car license. You have to pay a fee every year. And that totals for 2021, that totaled about 212 million. Then the figure below that is 22.5 million, and that is application fees. And that means every time you apply for a license, then you have to pay a certain fee. And you can think of that like applying for a driver's license. You pay a fee for the test,
sure,
and you pay that fee whether you get it or not. But it's quite small. It's about 1/10 of the authorization fees. So the big chunk of the total revenue, which you see at the bottom there, or a little bit lower down, 240.5 million, is the total revenue of the NNR. And 212 million of that, plus 22 million, so that's 234 million, comes from applicants, from people who hold licenses. And if you compare that to what comes from the government, which is a grant from Treasury in order to allow the NNR to function, that's 40, as you pointed out, 40. Actually, you said 43 because you were looking at the 2020 figure.
It's more than,
and in 2021, it fell.
It fell,
It fell for around 2.something million. So that's a very small portion of the revenue that the NNR does get. So in summary, the NNR is financially entirely reliant upon fees from license holders. So that's, just to be fair, that's not entirely unusual worldwide. Quite often regulators obtain revenue from the people that they regulate. But it does cause a little bit of a question mark in people's minds. And if you look for interest rate under expenditure, to put it in context, they spend about 173 million on staff salaries or compensation of employees, bonuses and all that stuff. And you can see that if that 212 million fell away or was halved, the NNR would not be able to pay its salaries next year. And it also might be interesting to ask the question of that 212, where does it come from? And if you add up the authorization and the application fees, about approximately half of it comes from Eskom itself, and the rest comes from various mining and other industrial installations. So the 250, so about 125, that is the amount of revenue that the NNR gets from Eskom.
And then, Peter,
and that it stands to lose.
You sent us an interesting graph, and I'd just like your input on that. Let's put that up on screen quickly, shall we? I've got it right here. So, right, there's the graph. And what do all those lines mean?
So I just went through the annual reports of the NNR, and I pulled this out of the financials, as we've just seen for 2 years there. And there are a few striking things. If you look at that orange line, that's a very clear upward trend, right? It starts under 100 million and it ends up at about 210 million, something like that. That is the authorization fees that we've just been talking about. So we can see year on year that increases. The other interesting line to look at is the government grant, which is the blue line at the bottom. And you can see that that's been pretty static since 2012. It hasn't increased. So because of inflation and so on, that has fallen in real terms. So the government is giving less and less in effect to the NNR each year, and the NNR is obtaining funds from applicants and authorization holders at a greater and greater rate. And so what's interesting is to look at the percentage. So what percentage of the NNR's revenue comes without strings? In other words, comes from government, that they'll get whether they grant authorizations or if there are no application fees or whatever, they'll still get that. But if you plot that as a percentage, it was somewhere around nearly 30% in 2012. That's the black line at the top left. And then you can see that it goes up and down, but the trend is down. The percent of money the NNR gets via government grants is falling. And this is something that the NNR, I think the ex-CEO of the NNR made quite a noise about when he was first appointed, that the NNR needs funding to be effective. And this is a disturbing trend, that the amount of funding the government allocates to it goes down every year in percentage terms.
Let's turn our attention to Eskom and load shedding in the tail end of this program. And perhaps the question I'd like to ask first comes from a comment that I saw flashing past me in the comment section. And that is, how much power does Eskom have when it comes to the NNR? How strong are Eskom when it comes to arm wrestling the regulator? Chris, your opinion?
Yeah, look, nominally, of course, the regulator, the NNR, is independent. But it's really very hard for it to exercise that independence because of the dominance of Eskom in the generation sector of South Africa. So, I mean, an example of this is surely this case where, a date was coming up for a shutdown where there was going to be this life extension project on unit number 2 at the beginning of this year. And the radioactive containment building for the steam generators wasn't ready. But Eskom was pretty insistent that they needed to start this project. And, the deadline is coming up for the license renewal. And Eskom says, "Don't worry, we'll sort out the building while we, as we proceed in this project." They do the shutdown, and the regulator buckles down and gives them the green light to switch off and start the project. It should never have done that, of course. So the question really is, what influenced the NNR to give that green light in the circumstances when it should not have.
Must
and
be
it can
pretty
only
difficult.
be the dominance.
Yeah, it must be
Very
pretty difficult if you're sitting on the board of the NNR when you've got the minister saying that he'll fire anyone who resists nuclear energy. I mean, how do you form your own opinion and remain impartial when political forces and governments are telling you what to think? At least it seems to be that way to me when I hear a comment like that. Is Andre de Ruyter doing his job properly? I mean, that's a question that I see popping up on Twitter all the time. Some people saying the guy's got so much to deal with that you can't expect him to fix anything. I mean, when he came in as CEO of Eskom, I think the whole country was going, yay, here's the end to our load shedding problems. He did say when he came in that load shedding won't end anytime soon. And it seems that our patience is growing thinner with the Eskom CEO. And we go back to that question. Is he doing his job properly?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to understand the limitations that Eskom have. Eskom certainly can do maintenance on their plant, but their plant is getting older and older. They can certainly complete Medupi and Kusile, that's within their powers, but there's a whole lot of legacy problems there. What they can't do is build new generation capacity, because that is a responsibility given to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to procure new generation capacity. And the point I'm trying to make is that if you want to solve load shedding, if that is the problem, and it is, it's not entirely within Eskom's powers. In fact, if you want my opinion, it requires a concerted effort by government, by Eskom, by municipalities, and by the customers of electricity, working together in a common purpose with a common vision. Government can't solve the problem on its own. Eskom can't solve it. Municipalities can't, and customers can't. But together, they can solve this problem, and quickly.
What is
the problem
solution?
that I see?
What is the solution to the load shedding problems we've got now? Is there a quick, I don't want to use the word quick, but in this context, is there a quick solution?
Yes, there certainly is. If customers of electricity and Eskom and government and municipalities have a common purpose to build 10,000 megawatts of wind and solar PV, plus 5,000 megawatts of battery storage, it could be delivered in 2 years, and it would end load shedding in its tracks. And there have been a number of independent studies that prove conclusively that if you were to do this, and it can be done if there was a common purpose, it would end load shedding in 2 years. Now, it doesn't just end there. We still have to continue building thereafter. But we need a national Marshall Plan that coordinates the efforts of government, municipalities, Eskom, and customers of electricity to build 10,000 megawatts of wind and solar and 5,000 megawatts of battery storage in 2 years, and it can be done if it's well coordinated.
What do I do? Tom London, Walter Vredenpark. I don't work for Eskom. I've got nothing to do with the NNR. I'm affected by load shedding. What do I do, Chris?
I think we've all got to stand up and wave this flag loud and clear and demand that government and municipalities and Eskom and customers work together. And we need to, this kind of national priority project, we have done it before. In the 1990s, Eskom coordinated a national effort to electrify South Africa in the Electricity for All campaign. It was a massive undertaking, huge technical issues involved and huge stakeholder issues involved, but it was done. And it was a national effort, and it became the biggest electrification program in the world. It was highly successful and has been acclaimed internationally. So these kind of national projects, these Marshall Plans, can be done if there's the necessary will and commitment all around. I fear that we're going to need a little bit more pain before we finally wake up and realize what we've got to do. But we need to be standing on the rooftops waving the flag. It can be done. We've done it before.
I guess that answers Christine Finnis's comment that it would be impossible for government, Eskom, municipalities, etc., to cooperate with the public. Obviously, we need to see more of that in South Africa. But thanks for pointing out a success story in the past that can point to how we can do things in the future. Now, we've got a minute or so to go, but I'm going to extend the show by a couple of minutes because, firstly, I want to pop this picture on the screen, and that is Outer's election or electoral reform competition. We're looking for your handiwork when it comes to making a cartoon. You can win some cash prizes. We'll pop the link with all the details and the link to go to enter this competition. Hey, you've got nothing to lose. Scribble something down and put your doodle skills to the test and send your contribution to this competition that Eskom, that's Outer rather, let me not make that mistake, it's a big one, that Outer is running. Just look for the link in the comment section underneath the screen to get involved in that. And then Stefanie Fick, who we really haven't seen enough of tonight. I mean, electricity is not really your field, Stefanie, but I've had a question up my sleeve since about 8 o'clock this morning when I read a line that is familiar to me: justice delayed is justice denied. And there isn't a week that goes by on the show that somebody says, why haven't we seen orange overalls yet? And the basic premise behind that saying justice delayed is justice denied is really that if you wait too long for justice, it's like not receiving justice at all. Are we in that situation, Stefanie Fick, Advocate Fick? Is justice taking so long now that there is no justice at all when it comes to corruption?
No, I refuse to believe that in this instance, justice delayed is justice denied. Let's rather think about, I like to say that the wheels of justice are turning. It's turning slowly some days and sometimes, but it is turning. And, you know, what comes around goes around. And I do believe that with civil society, firstly, let me say that I do believe that our saving grace is civil society. It is people like Chris, like Peter, like each and every one that's watching us each and every Wednesday, our supporters. It is up to civil society to make a difference. And I firmly believe that we can make that happen. The minute we sit back and either are hopeless or believe that someone else will do the job is the day that we lose. And we cannot let that happen. I think we are worth it. In other words, civil society, we're worth it. South Africa is worth it. So I think while there is an active civil society, justice will be done.
Well, thank you for answering my question, Advocate Fick. I keep saying Stefanie Fick, but she's Advocate Stefanie Fick, in actual fact. And I think the comment of the evening will follow on from what you've just said. It's just popped up on the screen. I'm going to make it the comment of the night. Bella Rafon says, I think all communities should start waking up, start demanding that Eskom and other electricity generation challenges be addressed immediately. If not, then I'm afraid the conspiracies are true. Well, that's it. We've run over time. I hope you've enjoyed the extra 2 minutes. I'd like to say thank you to our guests, or our viewers, rather, who have been joining us on YouTube and Facebook, who are first-time viewers. And we saw some people join in the last week or two are becoming regular viewers. Thank you. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the community on Facebook and YouTube. And we hope to see you every Wednesday night as we delve into these topics together. Well, let me say thank you to our guests this evening. We'll see if we can get Peter on screen quickly. And I'll just put everyone on screen. Peter, if you could put your camera on, we want to see your faces. We say goodbye. And here comes Peter now, I think. So let me pop everybody on screen and say, right, Peter's a dark.
We lost Peter.
We might have lost Peter, and if we've lost him, we'll say goodbye on his behalf. But Advocate Stefanie Fick, Head of Accountability and Governance at Outer, thank you for joining us this evening, Stefanie. As always, good to see you on screen. Chris Yellen, Managing Director of EE Business Intelligence, Pty Limited, energy expert, has joined us tonight, as well as Peter Becker, spokesperson for the Koeberg Alert Alliance. I hope they're watching the show tonight. You got a bit of an idea of what Koeberg is about, what's going on at Koeberg, that you got a bit of a clearer picture on what can save South Africa Africa when it comes to load shedding, what the next technology we should be using is. And despite all the political rhetoric and the news stories and sensational headlines, we scratched below the surface for you this evening and brought you some real valuable information. So thank you to the guests and contributors this evening. Most of all, thank you to you for pressing the play button on the show. If you haven't hit the like and share button, please do so now or after the broadcast. That's how we get it out to more and more people. And I look forward to catching you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. for the live show. If you watch after the fact, your view is just as important to us. Remember, you can still put a comment in there. You can still put a question in. Even if you watch the show a day or two later, our team at Outer monitors those questions and comments, and we value every bit of input that you give us. Well, that's it for our Wednesday night edition of the Outer Hour. Thank you for joining us. I hope that we find you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. in good health, with a bit of money in your pocket, being loved by everyone around you, and most of all, with the lights on. I'm Tom London, and I miss you already.
Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.